thank you so much. It's a privilege for me to be here tonight. My name is Sergio Danon, or Sergio Danon, as you pronounce here in England. I'm from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. I'm with the International Mission to Jewish people, and it's a blessing for me to share with you. Today, what's going to happen, I'm going to share my testimony, and then I also tell some stories from the field. Okay, so I was born and raised Jewish and came to faith, confessed Jesus as when I was 20, and I'll give you details about that. Okay, and since then, that's what I have been doing, witnessing to my Jewish people. Well, as you can see, my name is Sergio Danon, and that was how I was when I was just a new baby. I was born in 1968. My father, who was a professional photographer, he was the one who took this picture and developed that. And basically, I was raised in a Jewish home. You know, I went to Jewish school. You can see my picture there. Maybe I was like 4 or 5 years old there. It was a celebration of the Feast of Hanukkah, which is one of the traditional festivals, close to Christmas usually. When I was 13, I had my bar mitzvah. One thing that is important for you to tell, you know, my father was born Jewish. My mother, she was not. She converted to Judaism before getting married to my father. And it is interesting because when my parents, they decided to get married, her father was Catholic. And they said, no, we're just getting married, not religious wedding. And he said, no, their God's our God. So you need to convert to Judaism. So that's what she did. She went through a whole process, 4 years of studying in Judaism throughout the whole time that they were dating. And her conversion was so much recognized that her conversion was signed by the great rabbi in Israel. So it was really legitimate, her conversion to Judaism in back then. And that's funny because when she got married, my grandmother, my Jewish grandmother, should say that my mother was the most Jewish daughter-in-law that she had, because she was exactly the one who would, light the candles and follow all the traditions, which the ones who were born didn't care much. Okay? So that's exactly how I grew up. Even having grandparents who were Catholic, I was really raised in Judaism. And the things that when I had my bar mitzvah, all of you know what bar mitzvah is? Yeah, it's a Jewish moment when the boy goes before the whole community and before God and has a commitment to obey the Jewish law and is responsible of his sins before God. Okay, so religiously speaking, is considered an adult, even when he's only 13 years old. Okay, but 2 months before I had my bar mitzvah, my father, he left our home. Okay, he decided to separate from my mother. It was a really difficult time for us. And because of that, my bar mitzvah was going to happen in March. It had to be postponed because the rabbi felt that was not a good moment for us to celebrate. Okay, so my bar mitzvah was going to happen in March, was postponed to July. Okay, so it was a mess in our family by that moment, especially because when we prepare for the bar mitzvah, we memorize the parasha, the portion of the Torah that we're going to sing, and has to be sang precisely like that. And another month, I had to memorize everything again because it would be a different portion. Okay, so it was harder also because of that, but it was a moment that my father, I'm the oldest from 3 sons, one brother and one sister. I'm the oldest one. And when my father, he decided to go away from home, he came just to me, as the firstborn. And he said, son, I'm going to go out home and I want you to be helping your mother and help her, take care of your brother and sister. Uh, I'm not going to tell them about that. Your mother and you'll be the ones. So he was putting a lot of responsibility over me even before I had my bar mitzvah and I was only 12. And my mother, she didn't get much help of the Jewish community. She just felt that she was not being supported, by the community. So she started to look for help in every kind of religion that you can imagine. Then her father, her Catholic father, came to her and said, daughter, I know that you're really seeking God. But if I were to seek God, I would go to this church. And he pointed to her evangelical church. He said, no, I was born Catholic, I would die Catholic, but if I have to choose a church, go to this church. And that's where she started to feel really welcome. And then I had my bar mitzvah, and usually when you have a bar mitzvah, you have a really big celebration. At least back there in Brazil, like 45 years ago, we would have a whole day of celebration. We start in the morning, after the service, have a breakfast, then had lunch, tea time, and dancing the whole day. It would be really a whole day festival. But I didn't have reason to celebrate. So I asked my parents for a trip to Florida, Disney World, the dream of a teenage by that time. And that's what happened. I stayed 2 weeks in Florida. And when I returned, my father, he had come back home. So it was a delight for us, and what happened? My mother, she felt like she was blessed, that God had already blessed her. So she said, okay, let's go back to our normal lives. And that's what happened. We just returned our lives in the synagogue and everything back to normal. Until I was 16, my mother, she had to go through a surgery. And she had a blood, hemorrhage, a blood loss. But the problem is that they only found out 3 days later. And she had to take some transfusion. But the problem is that they gave her wrong and contaminated blood. It was exactly during the time that HIV was showing up, and she was really concerned about that. And then she says that when she received the blood, the transfusions, she felt like her bones were like breaking, cracking. And she was on a semi-coma for a whole month. She could not react, but she could hear everything that the doctors were saying. And one day, the doctors came to my father and they said, she's not going to survive. Only a miracle for her to survive. And the thing is that when she heard that, as I mentioned, she could not react. But when the doctors said that, she saw Jesus. It was by her bed. She saw him. He just smiled at her. And she said that because of that, she was not going to die. Usually I tell her, kidding, Mom, if Jesus shows up to me like that, I said, just take me, I'm ready. But the thing is that she was not ready. She hadn't confessed Jesus yet. And what happened is that when she left the hospital, or when she woke up, the doctor said, okay, the miracle happened, but she is going to have several troubles throughout her life, sequels. She's going to have anemia, hepatitis, several other problems. They named like 5 or 6 diseases. and they said she's never going to be healed from those diseases throughout her life. Well, they didn't know God because she was healed to each one of those diseases. Okay, she doesn't have anything. She's still alive today. And when she left the hospital, she came to my father and said, you know, I made a mistake. I started to have a relationship with God, and I gave my back to him, and I want to go back to church. So there she went back to that same church that her father pointed to her some years ago. But she said to my father, no, but I want you to go back with me. He told her, you know, I'm Jewish. I was raised Jewish. This is not for me, but I'll be with you. I'll just sit by your side. I'll just cross my arms. I'll not sing. I'll not pray. I'll not do anything. I'll just be by your side. And she said, okay, at least you'll be with me. In 3 months, both of them were being baptized. That's how it all started. I was 16. Okay. Back then, it was a Pentecostal church that they were going, and they had a TV show, and they were interviewed for the whole week. You know, a Jewish couple coming to faith in Jesus. And one of those days, one of my uncles, one of his brothers, one of my Jewish uncles, he saw the interview. No, don't ask me what he was doing watching a Christian TV show, but he said that he was just running through the channels. Well, back then there was not even cable in Brazil, so just live TV, you know. And that weekend, one of my cousins, she was getting engaged, and this uncle, he called my father, and he said, you know, Rachel, she's getting engaged this weekend, and only Jewish people will be here. Since you're no longer Jewish, you're no longer invited. You're not welcome in my home. His own brother. And he said to my father, no, but Sergio and Jacques and Denise, you know, myself and my brother and sister, they are still Jewish. They may come. And I turned to my father and said, you know, Dad, I don't believe as you believe, but I respect your decision. I've seen changes in your life. So where my parents are not welcome, so we are not. So we're not going to her engagement. So for 5 years, the family stopped talking to us. The only person that would talk to us was my Jewish grandmother. We would go to her home for the Jewish festivals, and we would be by the corner of the living room. No one would say anything to us, just my grandmother. Maybe just a good evening, and that was it, and they would not talk to us the rest of the night. So that's how it happened for 5 years. Until when I was 18 years old. When I was 18 years old in Brazil, we are obligated to draft into the army. Okay? And I didn't want to serve at the army, but you see that there I am. My mother, she told me, you know, son, you don't want to serve the army? Just go to church and pray and ask God to deliver you from the army. I said, okay. Sounds like a plan, you know. So I went to the church and I came before God and I said, no, Lord, if you deliver me from the army, I will believe that Jesus is the Messiah. You know what happened? I learned my first lesson that with God, there's no bargain, you know. You cannot believe in Jesus in exchange of something. I had to serve the army. And it was exactly in the army that God worked in my life. There was a guy in my platoon that he was a Christian. His father was a Baptist pastor. And he was such a peaceful man that his peace disturbed me. I'm not sure if I've ever seen this kind of thing, someone so peaceful that you cannot have peace because he's so peaceful. And one day I turned to him and asked, Zambrotti, how is it possible for you to be so peaceful? And he turned to me and he quoted Proverbs 15, verse 1, that the soft answer turns away wrath. And I said, okay, he can do it, I can do it. But can we have peace without God? No. And I tried so hard. I couldn't. And I even thought, well, the Jewish Bible doesn't say anything about Jesus, But by that time, I was being prepared to be an officer in the Brazilian army. And we finished the first training in December. The second term had to be in July, and during this time, we were still in debt with the Brazilian army. So we could not get a job because of that. And I was studying at university at night, and during the day I was by myself at home. When my parents went to work, my brother and sister went to school, I started to read the Bible in secret. I didn't want anyone to know that. The Jewish people, we are a really prideful people, and I didn't want anyone to know that I was that curious. And I would not read just the Bible. I would devour the Bible. I would read up to 70, 80 chapters a day. I remember one day that I took the book of Revelation. I read 3 times in a row, So much curious I was. And when I read the Bible, because, for you to read the Bible, the whole Bible in 1 year, you need to read it 3 chapters a day. I was reading up to 70, 80 a day. So I read throughout the Bible several times. And that was not enough, I was not only reading, but I started to study the Bible. I started to see those numbers on the right of the reference, and I started to compare the passages. I really started to study the Bible. And after those 6 months, I could not deny that Jesus is the Messiah. So I finished my training at the army. I met my friend again. I never told him or anyone that I had read the Bible. But suddenly, I finished the training in the end of July. And on Friday, 2 days later, I asked my parents to go to school, to church with them. In 2 weeks, I was being baptized. It was back in 1988. I was 20 years old. So right now I'm almost 58. So it's been almost 38 years now that I'm serving the Lord. And that's when I started to, 1 year later, that's when I met this American pastor who was working in Brazil, who was a missionary to the Jewish people. That's when we left that Pentecostal church that my parents were. And I met this missionary, and he started to train me on witnessing to the Jewish people. I was 21 years old, so I'm really evangelizing my people for 37 years now. Okay. That's about the time, 1 year later, that's exactly when our relatives, they start to talk to us again, because on the same day that I was baptized, my sister, she was also baptized. When she saw me, taking the faith step, she decided the same thing. And that's when I think the mind of my relatives, my uncles and aunts, they thought, okay, maybe if we confront Joseph, my father and my mother, they were by themselves, maybe they will quit. But after they saw that myself and my sister, they also taken this faith in Jesus, I think they thought, okay, there's not much that we can do now. So they made an agreement with my family. Okay, we will talk to you again, but don't mention Jesus to us. And I said, okay, we don't need to mention. Now that they are the ones who ask about Jesus. And throughout these years, this 37 years that have been witness to them, I saw a couple of aunts that confessed Jesus, a couple of uncles also who confessed Jesus. My grandmother, my Jewish grandmother, she was 93 years old when she confessed Jesus as well. Yeah, my father's mother. That's so much interesting, her testimony, because she was always the kind of really active woman. On her 80s, she'd take the bus and she'd go everywhere. But she had a problem with diabetes and she had to remove her thumb. So she started really walking as she used to walk. So mostly she remained home. And my father, he started to feel concerned about her salvation. So maybe she'll die soon and I need to present her the gospel. And then she turned to her and said, Mom, I'm really concerned about you and I want to show you who Jesus is. And so he started to present the gospel and she started to laugh at him. And Mom, I'm serious, don't laugh at me. I'm talking about our Messiah. And she turned to him and said, Son, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because I really believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And I said, how come? Why you didn't never mention that? And she said, well, because I saw how much trouble our family was when you came to believe. And I didn't want to cause the same trouble, but I believe so. And on that day, she prayed with him to confess Jesus. And so we saw many in our family also come to the same faith. So it's something that has been a really encouragement to us. And then that's when my church, I'm the church that I pastor also. It used to be a synagogue. The missionary who introduced me to Jewish evangelism, he used to visit that synagogue, and that's how, when we met him, he didn't have a place to worship. He wanted to have a place to put the Jews came to faith through his testimony. And he found this synagogue that had been closed. Before that, we were meeting on Wednesday at my parents' home, and Saturday and Sunday at his associate pastor's home. So on Saturday, I was the youth leader, and that's where I also met my wife. My wife, she was the niece to his associate pastor. He was Jewish, although my wife, she's not Jewish. His wife, it was my wife's aunt. So that's how I met my wife. We got married 34 years ago, and she's a blessing of my life. She confessed Jesus when she was 5 years old. She grew up, in faith, and in the beginning she not really wanted me to be a missionary. I didn't want to be a missionary, but when God called me, she was really battling with that. But we are so blessed that we have this is our beautiful family. On the left, you see Bruna. Bruna is my daughter-in-law. She's married to Israel, my oldest son, he's 30. And Benjamin is our first grandson. Yesterday, he just turned 1 year and a half. My youngest son, Gabriel, and myself and my wife, Alexia. So it's been a blessing. Israel, he's also a pastor. Although it's not his main job, he works for Deloitte, but he's also a pastor. He's and Gabriel, he plays the drums and he works with social media. He loves being the camera as Andy. So it's a blessing to know that my whole family is really involved in ministry. It's something that I didn't understand why. It's such a blessing, because sometimes we see so many ministers, missionaries, pastors, that their family away. But it's a blessing to know that my family is really working in ministry. So you can be praying for us, and be praying for my family, for our ministry, okay? And since then, I mentioned I've been working on Jewish evangelism for that many years. I remember when I had just started, when I was 21 years old. This pastor, this missionary, he used to, every weekend I would go out with him to witness. The first time that I went with him, he would go to a park. He would use a megaphone, those things that used in the past, and he would speak with that. And I remember the first time that he came and he took this megaphone and gave him my hand, and he said, "Oh, now it's your turn." And I said, "My turn of what? What should I do?" And so, "Did you read the Bible this morning?" I said, "Yes, I did." "Well, just say what about what you read." So that's how I started this. If you need to meet me, by that time I was really shy, but God started to break all the hindrances, to make me be where I am right now. Okay, so since I was 21, started Jewish evangelism, but I started as a full-time missionary 25 years ago with another organization, and 5 years ago I started with IMJP, International Mission to Jewish People. And I'd like to share some stories with you, what has been going on. As I said, not only through my family, but what has been happening in Brazil. This is my father here on the right, Joseph, his name. But you see that man there behind bars? For safety reasons, I just give an alias, okay? So usually I call him Yaakov. Yaakov is a Jewish man. His family came from Romania, part from Romania, part from Hungary, to Brazil. And he's a Jewish man that the family left Europe for safety reasons. And I have been witnessing for him. I've been witnessing to him for the last 2 years. Okay, he has been facing really financial difficulties. He had a home in Rio. I said ahead because he was expelled from his home for the militia. He lived in a dangerous area, and the militia put him out of his home. And he's living by favor in someone's home, a friend of his. So to help, raise some money, this friend of him made a small store by the garage of his home, and he sell things, just it's a really small market at his home, and he sells exactly through this bar. And when I visit him, I stayed usually 1 hour there standing, just talking to him. Usually I don't open the Bible, but I quote the Bible to him. I apply to situations that he's living. Okay, he has been not only financially, but has this leading also with health issues. He has a cataract that he needs to have surgery, but he has been postponing to do that. Okay, he doesn't have health insurance, so he needs to go through public hospitals in Brazil, which is not easy. And he has also been postponing. Okay, so I'd like you to ask you to be praying for Yaakov. He sometimes I feel like he wants more a companionship. Someone to talk because he's lonely than really interested about Jesus. But sometimes he makes so much good questions and that show that he's so much open. You know, I think he's really open to know more about Jesus, and as times pass by, I think, and now he's like 76, he's about to be 77 years old, so it's not getting much younger. And I really pray for him that he may confess Jesus. This one is another example of just happened though. Gabi, throughout 2025, she battled cancer. I was witnessing for her throughout this year. And we had just before the holidays, my last day of working on December 19th. That's when IMJP we close for the holidays. And when I returned from my vacation, because I also took another week on the 12th, January 12th, her son called me saying that she had passed on December 31st. That broke my heart, when her son told me that. I cried the whole day, and for a few days I was just really crying for knowing that she had passed. But she was much more open than Yakov. She was, although she never confessed to me Jesus, the last time that we spoke, she was so much open, and I was praying and said, God, she's so close now. And her son, when he called me, he said, Sergio, my mother, she had you in such high esteem. She loved you so much. She loved so much talking to you, the way that she spoke to her. And she didn't live in Rio, she lives in a city in the south of Brazil called Blumenau. So I would talk to her over the phone, over WhatsApp, sometimes video. And he told me, she really loved talking to you. You have no idea how important the times that you spoke to her, it was important to her. So you never know if she took the decision or not. If she prayed to confess Jesus, I'm not sure. I have an idea. When my last day of work was the 19th, he told me that she started to feel bad on the 20th of December. On the 26th, that's when she agreed to go to the hospital. And on the 31st, that's when she passed. So what happened in this time, only the Lord knows. But the good thing is that her son, Ricardo, that's his real name. He's really open and he's willing to talk. So maybe I can just continue the study that I was doing with his mother. I continue with him. He's a Uber driver. He has a brother. He is autistic, level 3, really hard kind of behavior. And he really needs not a lot of help. I think he's in his mid-30s, Ricardo. So I think he lacks, how can I say, a father figure. So of course I cannot be his father, but maybe I can give him some guidance, spiritual guidance as well. So would you be praying for Ricardo as well and his brother Andrew? So especially after I return, because after I spoke to him, that's when I had to come here, and then when I return to Brazil, I'll be back to be talking to him. So I'd like to also be praying for them, okay? I'll mention later the materials from my organization. Here's a story you have documented here. That's the Herald, the magazine that we send to our supporters. And his testimony is here, okay? But I will tell you briefly about that. that's when this woman, this Christian woman, she contacted me. We have a common friend who is a Jewish believer, and she asked me to officiate her wedding. The problem that she said, "Oh no, my husband, no, my fiancé, he's Jewish. He believes that Jesus is the Messiah, but he doesn't believe Jesus is God. He believes he's just a man. Would you mind officiating our wedding?" And I said, "Okay, well, let's do baby steps. Let's start talking so that I can know you better." I started to witness to him. He was such a stubborn man, he was really hard. My wife says that when she saw the way that he was behaving, because he was also not from Rio, he was really on the north of the country, in a state called Acre in the Amazon. And I would also meet him by video. And my wife, when she saw his behavior, he said, "Oh, this guy is so much stubborn. If I were you, I'd just already kick him off, quit from him." And usually I told him, "That's why I am the missionary, not you." And what happened in that is that we started studying the Bible. It was in the beginning of May last year. It was about the end of August. He confessed Jesus, and he believed that Jesus is God, not only Messiah. And it was amazing. And then you see here in the front page exactly the picture when I was officiating his wedding. And now I'm starting exactly discipleship with him. It's something, that a present, a gift that the Lord sent. I've been working with International Mission to Jewish People. We call it IMJP for 5 years now. In April 1st will be 5 years. He is the third Jewish man in these 5 years in Brazil that confessed Jesus. Okay, so it's sometimes people will say, "Well, only 3?" But it's one by one that we go. Jewish people, not easy to minister to, okay? But we are seeing the work happen. We are seeing them confess Jesus, okay? Last year, so to give an example, the kind of work that we do in IBP, we do street outreaches. This is the outreach that we did last year. Here we have like 15 people, but sometimes we had from 20 to 25 people on the streets helping us throughout the week. You see here in the front my son Gabriel. He is always there to take the pictures. Last year we had like 10 Jewish contacts on the streets throughout the week. And from those 10, I've been visiting one more regularly. It's this man. I'll call him David, is the one in the middle. He's an Israeli. He has been living in Brazil for the last 7 years, and he's homosexual. You see this guy that is with him, that's his mate, they live together. And even being homosexual, he's open to know more about Jesus. The guy that lives with him, his mother was a Christian. He was raised going to church. Okay, so he already knows the gospel. And I've been able to witness to them. David, he's so much open, and he's asking, "Oh, how do you deal with homosexuality?" And said, "Well, it's a sin, the same way that adultery is a sin. We tell people not to commit that anymore. After you come to believe, you're not supposed to be doing that." And I even told him about a friend of mine. He was a Jewish believer also. He was a homosexual, and he confessed Jesus. He started being homosexual when he was 15 years old. He came to believe, confess Jesus when he was more than 70, or he was practicing homosexuality for 55 years. And I told him, of course, you cannot change your mind, that you're thinking about that for 55 years in a moment. Of course, you still have battles. But after he came to faith, he no longer practiced homosexuality. So it's something that after you confess Jesus, something that you have to deal with. It's not okay to be practicing that. And I've been talking things like this to them, and they're still willing to talk to me. Okay, so pray also for David and Saul. They are the ones that are getting closer to me, in this witnessing process. And I really believe that God, on His sovereignty, He can really work in their lives in such a way that they don't want to live together, maybe just be brothers in the Lord. Amen. This year, we're going to have an outreach. I'll be co-leading an outreach in the Boston area. We'll be from July 26th to August 1st. I just met the guy that will be co-leading with me. He's a Korean guy. He started to be a missionary to Jewish people with us about 2 years ago. So I've been mentoring him also to teach him how to do evangelism. And it's a really good time for us also because in Boston there are many Brazilian people who live in Boston. Boston is the second biggest Jewish population in the United States. That's in Boston. Okay, so I'll be contacting churches as well. I believe there are Jewish people, Brazilian Jewish people who live in Boston as well. So that God may guide me also to those people. We have missionaries that will be coming from other countries, that we have from Ukraine, from Israel. They're Russian-speaking Jewish people. So they be witnessing to those Russian-speaking Jews also in Boston. Okay, so our heart is really to reach out to my Jewish people, and you see that. I just gave you a few examples of how things are happening in Brazil. If you want to contact me, I'm really willing to be in touch with each one of you. My email, my phone number. And another thing that I ask you to copy my phone. Now starting in March, I will start to send by WhatsApp prayer requests on spot. Okay, once a week I'll be sending, for example, now I'm going to visit Yaakov. Would you be praying for me so that he can open his heart? So I'll be asking you just on the moment that I need your prayers. Once a week I'll be sending the prayer requests and also responses from the requests that I give. Okay, so if you want to receive this broadcasting, I need you to save my phone number at your cell phone, because either way, if I send and the phone number is not saved in your phone, it will be considered spam. Okay, so if you really want to receive that, you can just save my phone number in your cell phone, and then you put your WhatsApp number here, and I will know that you are willing to receive that, and I will send this information to you. Okay, and even if you see here, for example, talking about my one offering gift, I really, of course, I need your gifts, but not my point. I really would like to each one of you to fill this card, okay? Because even if you never send me a gift, you'll be able to be helping me with the most powerful weapon that you have, your prayers, okay? And I really mean it, okay? So that's my will, that you all fill this out to be praying for me. Well, basically, that's it. I think I spoke enough already. And it's a real privilege, for me to be here tonight. And I really appreciate the presence of each one of you and for your prayers for me as well. Okay? Thank you so much.
Be thou my vision.